Well, hello and welcome to this Fotospeed video with me, Tim Jones. We've got Mr. Sam Gregory here, and we are joined by the amazing photographer and Fotospeed ambassador, Chris Palmer.
Well, I'm not sure about the amazing, but I'm doing the best. Hi.
No. And Chris is here to talk about, well, his work, which is going to be a little separate video, but he's also going to talk about his work with the RPS.
Yes, that's right.
And his work on the distinction panels.
Mm-hmm.
And you're on the visual arts panel.
That's right,
so
yes.
You're the chair now.
I am the chair. I'm in charge. I look after the assessors and have to be sure that the protocol is followed. And we're very conscious these days that we've got people viewing our assessments from right around the world on Zoom. So we typically have 70 or 80 people watching the assessments on Zoom. And we have some people at RPS House watching the assessments physically, but it's my job to harness the opinions of the normally five assessors, and conduct everything according to the requirements of the RPS.
Oh, fantastic.
Actually, Chris, I was just going to say, if I can dial it right back in terms of the various panels and why it would be beneficial potentially for someone who is a photographer out there in the world, RPS member or not at this point, to consider looking into this way of working and having their work appraised and the value of it for them, perhaps.
It goes back, I mean, from my own personal point of view, to when I used to do photography in a very amateur way alongside my father. And I'd produce a print in a wet darkroom. Yes, I'm that old. But I'd produce a print and I'd show it to my mother and she'd say, "Yes, it's very nice, dear." Well, what does that mean? So I then graduated to join a camera club where I was working with like-minded photographers and having my work assessed by photographic judges. And you enter the competitions and yes, you might well get the odd bit of success. But if you want to be really interested in your photography and advance your photography personally, then the RPS is an interesting avenue because the RPS have very high standards of requirements, but also they police the way the assessments are conducted in a very careful way as well. And you are assessed by experts within that particular field. So there are three different levels of assessment. Firstly, the licentiate, which establishes your own credibility as a photographer. It's proving your ability and versatility as a photographer, but establishing that you can produce work to a consistent technical standard. You only need 10 pictures for that. The next level up is the associate distinction, which requires 15. And then if you really want to test your mettle, then you go for a fellowship, which is 20 or 21 images. As I said, for a licentiate distinction, you're establishing your ability as a photographer. But when you get up to the A, the RPS are then starting to recognize that most photographers gravitate to a particular area of photography. And to recognize and acknowledge that, they have the different genres. So I sit on the visual art panel and chair it. And that embraces such a wide field of creative photography. The RPS define the visual art as requires that the photographer displays a creative vision, which is a very loose term. It's
quite open, isn't it?
Really. It is open. But in addition to the visual art panel, there is a natural history panel, travel panel. There's so many different areas, documentary and landscape and so on and so forth. I now have been, or just recently been appointed onto the landscape panel as well. But it means that within that panel, the assessors are specialists in that particular area of photography. I mean, the applied panel is really for professional photographers doing portraiture, weddings, formal photography, or pictures that are being produced for a specific purpose. So you're being examined or assessed to a particular published criteria. And providing you do your homework, and it's always good to seek advice and the RPS offer a facility called a one-to-one. So you can book an advice session with the RPS. You have to pay for it, but you are then put in touch with one of the panel members, and you actually spend an hour on Zoom with one of the panelists, and they'll give you good advice to show you the way forward. And during this video, we'll have the opportunity of sharing one or two of the hints and tips that people might not necessarily immediately think about when they're considering a potential submission.
Well, yeah, I think there's almost, I don't know, maybe from an outsider for an RPS, because I suppose I have my A, but I was exempt because of my masters and things.
Yeah.
So I got it. So I haven't been through the whole process, but there's almost, for me anyway, I don't know if people out there might have kind of read a little bit more into this, but there's almost a little bit of a mystery about what you kind of look for in this. You've got your panel and you've got so you work from a criteria, is that right?
Yes.
Kind of marking criteria.
Yes. Well, it's always worth doing the homework, going onto the RPS website and seeing what we require. The criteria is laid down, and we are told as assessors that we don't have to like the work, don't have to like the pictures, but if they meet to the criteria. So thinking simplistically about the A, we need a body of work, 15 pictures. Now you can submit as prints, you can submit them digitally, or you can submit them as part of a book as well. We need a statement of intent, which gives a bit of an understanding about what the work is trying to say. We're not interested in what equipment you've used. We're not interested in how they've been processed. We want to know what you're trying to communicate or display in your submission. It needs to be to a good technical standard. There is a requirement to have a cohesive body of work, so it looks like the photographic voice of one photographer rather than a disparate set of pictures that might be considered as entries in a camera club competition. So all of those things need to be taken into account when you're compiling your panel. We also need to have a presentation plan, so we need to know how it's best going to be presented. As a print panel, you can arrange your work on one of 3 rows. You can put it in 2 rows, or as a single row if you want.
You like the one on the table we got, a small version, because we didn't have a big enough table. But.
Yeah, so this little set of pictures is just a set of photographs that I put together. But I think it shows a sense of balance. The images are not printed too big, so that there is a relationship between the size of the print and the mount. And as I was saying before we started this video, each picture occupies its own space. And when you think about arranging your particular panel, you need to think about what the whole effect of the total presentation is. So with a submission at A level, with associate level, we're looking for 15 images, and we are considering the 16th image, what it looks like. And that's part of the assessment. We also look at the choice of the paper, if it's prints, how it's been processed, and how it's presented. The presentation plan and the way the choice of the mount, the colour of the mount, it's all taken into account as part of the assessment.
And I think in that process, just from the point of view of somebody taking part, all the information about what you're looking for, and as you've alluded to there, the criteria is all there to be found on the RPS website. But that whole process of, photography from just being out in the field, creating the image, editing the image, thinking about the paper, thinking about the print, thinking about the mount, thinking about the overall, that's such a great deal of things to learn.
Yes.
And you add to your arsenal as a photographer, as it were, to then make more compelling bodies of work, which then develops that individual's voice and their aesthetic vision, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think those are the positives for me, would be that whole journey you go through learning. You have to think about how you're printing, how you're presenting, So it's not just, are these good pictures? It's not about that. It's can this person produce those bodies of work that are compelling and coherent, I suppose is the word, isn't it?
And just picking up on that point, Sam, I was guided by a very eminent photographer who's no longer with us, a guy called Bill Wisden, FRPS, who actually received an MBE for his awards for his success in photography. But he said that you don't seek a distinction almost seeks you. And you're going out doing your photography. And so often the case that you can arrive at a location that perhaps it's difficult maybe to take a single iconic picture. But actually, if you gather together a set of pictures, you can actually say so more. There was another eminent photographer who, again, is sadly no longer with us, a guy called Eddie Sethner, who had a lovely analogy between photography and writing. He said, a word can be very effective, but isn't a sentence better? And if you carry that across into photography, you can actually say so much more in a body of work about a particular subject or an event or whatever it happens to be, than trying to embrace what it's like to be there in one single picture. And this way of working thematically on projects is something that the RPS probably encouraged through the distinctions.
And I've run into that with people out on workshops and camera club talks and things like that, where those people have really developed. And I mean, these are great examples as well of just a beautiful set of things that work nicely together. But it can be on wider scenes, whatever, that coherency can come across a whole group, can't it?
Absolutely.
Chris, can I ask a question? We were going to talk a little bit about these and sizes. We'll just come back to that in a sec. Are there common issues that you see people maybe falling down on that we could maybe just address as a bit of a tips and tricks from inside here? Because and that said, there is no inside. It's very open. The judging process is open, and what you look for is open. So I know that. But are there 2 or 3 simple things that where maybe you see commonly stuff falls down a bit?
Yes. Well, in terms of as we're here at Fotospeed, we need to think about the prints. It's generally advisable not to use a gloss surfaced paper because it has a high reflectivity and it makes the images difficult to view. A lot of people print too big. As a general rule, A4 or there or thereabouts is perfectly big enough for most subject matter. Some landscapes benefit from being printed a bit bigger than A4. There is no limit to the size of the mount that you can use within the RPS. You can present them bigger than 40 by 50, which is the typical size that most people use. I've chosen to mount these on square format.
It works beautifully,
But in this particular set of pictures, they're a little bit smaller than A4 in terms of their print size. But the important thing is that if you're going to mix, as I have, portrait and landscape format pictures, that they display well. So what in this particular submission, I've chosen a common center line to mix the horizontal and vertical format so that they all sit well and have, in relation to the overall presentation, a consistency and cohesion. So this is something that you need to think about. So generally avoid gloss. Don't print too big. You can, if you wish, have your prints printed commercially, but there's no point in coming to us and saying, oh, well, I'm sorry about the print quality because I didn't print them. I sent these off to Snappy Snaps and they produced them. You are the decider of the print quality and the choice of the paper. And paper choice is something that we do take into account. So these particular pictures are recording the details through semi-obscure glass on the side of a greenhouse. So if you actually were there photographing beside me, I'm actually replicating the effect of what it's like to look through glass by printing it on a luster paper. If perhaps you're photographing and displaying pictures that were taken in the mist, if you stand there when you're photographing and you look at the scene, is it glossy? No. Is it luster? No. A misty scene is matte. So often the subject matter will almost tell you what paper would be appropriate for your subject. In the visual art panel, we get a lot of architecture pictures. Some of them are reflective surfaces of, the reflections in architecture. So again, a luster paper might be appropriate rather than a matte, because you're replicating the reflective nature of the reflections you're recording. We've also had picture submissions where they're working with metallic subjects. So one of the Fotospeed metallic papers might be appropriate for that.
Yeah.
So this is something that we take into account, the appropriateness of the paper to the subject. And it's something that people don't necessarily always immediately think about when they're printing their work.
It has to be a conscious choice, doesn't it?
Yes,
in a way.
yes.
There's
It's
a
part
reason.
of the process. It shows to us that the applicant cares.
Yeah.
It's not just there for convenience.
No,
Yeah, yeah.
I
no.
think that's where I've been to exhibitions and you're hanging work and things and you think that was just a convenience kind of thing. It still looks fabulous,
Yes.
but you can
Yeah.
tell. You can tell.
I mean, you won't necessarily be, we always say you never fail a submission. You're just unsuccessful. And you won't necessarily be marked down because you've printed on an inappropriate paper, but it might influence when we take in other factors as to whether you're going to be successful or not.
And is there a feedback process, or is that?
Yes, definitely. So because all of the RPS is entirely transparent, so you can watch all of the assessments. It's free. You go onto rps.org, observe, and you can obtain the Zoom code so you can watch any of the assessments. So that's a good way of learning what we're looking and how we assess. But subsequently, if someone is not successful, then the panel chair compiles feedback from all of the assessors and then subsequently writes a feedback letter to the applicant so that they have an understanding about how they can progress the panel to a successful submission in the future.
Fair enough. I mean, that's part of the learning as well, isn't it? Because sometimes those things you may not have been aware of, but perhaps like you pointed out, Chris, I think if people are seeking a bit of advice beforehand, watching the other online, the panels and how they're talked about, then I think some of that learning can be done before you get to the submission process. That's the goal, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's just about doing your homework and knowing what we're looking for. And if you follow the things that I've suggested, like going onto the RPS website, you can look at sample successful panels there as well. Watch the assessments, build your work, get to a stage where you feel that perhaps you've got a potential panel together. I mean, for an associate submission, you need 15 pictures, but I typically suggest people get maybe 30 to start with and then pare it down to perhaps 20, which might be 15 plus your spares, and then get advice from a one-to-one. And then give yourself time to further develop that based on the feedback that you've received. And I speak as someone who's done nearly 50 one-to-ones. I've yet to get to undertake a one-to-one where it's a perfect submission that is good to go. There's always room for improvement, either in just the vocabulary that they've used and in the statement of intent, or the development of the photography and the processing and so forth. Allow yourself to develop it. You can do an additional one-to-one before you then subsequently submit. Some people like to work to a deadline, and so they will actually book an assessment and then go right up to the wire. But the one thing that I always advise people to do is, if you're going to submit, be absolutely sure that when you send this work out to the RPS and it goes to RPS House, it's the best you can do.
Yeah.
Don't send in something that's half considered. No. And we can always remember when we sent in some homework at school to the teacher and it's pulled up immediately. There's nothing worse than you've got a few doubts about a particular panel, and then as soon as it goes up, you can see it, and the observers,
if you have doubts,
the assessors pick up on it as well.
It's going to be immediate.
But I think, like you say, fresh eyes, someone else looking at it, you're always going to find something, because we can't always see that ourselves sometimes, can we? Whatever that, all the vocabulary or all those things you've pointed out, you are so deep into the work yourselves. It's always good to have a peer or an expert, if you can hook up with one to actually get that information?
Well, I think we're often we can get too close to it.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was putting my own fellowship panel together, and a friend of mine guided me a little bit and helped me. And we came to the final selection of the panel. I had 30 prints made, and you need 20 or 21 for a fellowship. And one particular print he pulled out, he says, well, you can't use that. And I said, but that's my favourite picture. He said, yes, but it doesn't live with the rest of the pictures.
Yeah.
It does, it's compromising the cohesion. And sometimes having someone who is knowledgeable and can, question the validity of a particular picture can be really valuable.
Yeah.
So this one-to-one process can often identify those issues.
Objectively, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Cool.
It's I think it's a great process to go through, and to expand your photography, if that's kind of where you want to go, I think, isn't it?
It does, and the thing that I've found, and I've been on the distinctions process now for nearly 25 years, is that when you build your way through the steps from an L to an A and possibly to an F, it actually gives you the confidence to say, well, I've established I'm now a licentiate, or I'm now an associate. Or ideally, if you can even get up to the fellowship level, which is a really tough one, it establishes, a real credibility. I mean, so often in the camera club world, your work might well be selected to represent the club, and that's a nice thing to do, but it doesn't acknowledge your own personal photography in such a strong and direct way, as is the case with the RPS distinctions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating to hear about it. And I think for anyone out there, if you want to find out more, get onto the RPS website. There's lots of information there, and like we say, past guides and other things that have been successful. And I think there's a lot to take from it, just for your own photography going forward, and all those aspects that we've talked about to do with the presentation, the mounting, the printing, the photography itself. What are you trying to say? Why do you do photography in the first place? I mean, it's an obvious question, but a lot of people can't give me a good answer when I ask them. Why? It's true, isn't it?
We regularly used to do that when I used to run the workshops. Why do you do photography? I mean, speaking personally, and perhaps it'll come out in the video later when we talk about my own personal photography, I just have a creative itch that just needs to be scratched.
Yeah.
I don't need to be a member of a camera club, though I am. I just still have to do it.
Yeah.
If I haven't been out photographing for a few weeks, my shutter finger starts to itch, and I get those withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah, we all know that one.
And I just need to be out expressing myself creatively through a camera, and that's often what people need to do.
Yeah.
But other people have different ways. There's no right or wrong reason for it, really. It's just a wonderful. In my case, I was going to say hobby, but in my case, it's an obsession, I suppose, in photography.
Yeah, I think it's an obsession for all of us.
Yeah. That's why we sat here talking about it.
It kind of turns into that. But
yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Fantastic. No, thank you very much, Chris, for kind of sharing that side of the RPS and what they do and things. I know it's a thing that hopefully, I do know that a few people quite a few people are interested in, kind of watch our channel and things. So it's a great outlet as well. And if you haven't been to the RPS building in Bristol, it's a fabulous facility now, isn't it? I don't think it's used enough. That's what I'm saying. It's got a lovely gallery and theatre there, haven't they, where all the sessions are and teaching spaces and things like that. So it's a great resource to use. So but thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm sure the RPS will benefit from this airing of this video subsequently as well. So thank you.
But I will put links to all your work as well in the description.
We're going to do a separate video with Chris, so we're talking about his work. So,
But well, thank you for watching, and hopefully that's you've learned something and inspired you to go out and perhaps look at the RPS website and download some of the bits about the distinctions process. As always, don't forget to subscribe to the Fotospeed YouTube channel, and also subscribe to our newsletter as well to get exclusive discounts, etc., and all the lovely news from us here at Fotospeed. And also don't forget, if you are looking to look at printing a panel maybe, or just get into printing your work, don't forget to download the free Art of Printing, the free ebook looking at everything printing wise from us here at Fotospeed. So on that note, I will thank Chris again for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you, Sam, for
Pleasure.
being my partner in crime today. And we will see you next Thursday. Bye-bye.